Welcome everybody. This is exciting to have so many people join us today. Just a brief intro by myself. This is hosted by Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a nonpartisan, solutions-oriented, grassroots advocacy organization focused on effective, efficient, and durable climate policies. CCL is technology neutral and supports nuclear energy along with other technology options to solve the energy trilemma, reliability, affordability, and sustainability, specifically the climate angle. And so this call is hosted by the Nuclear Energy Action Team. And actually, one housekeeping note, everybody please, if you can mute yourself for the presentation section, and we'll have Q&A at the end. But Jim, over to you to introduce us to the Nuclear Energy Action Team.
Hey everyone, my name is Jim Hoff. I'm a retired nuclear engineer and the founder of the CCL Nuclear Energy Action Team. What that's all about is it's a group within CCL that has an expertise in nuclear. One of the main things, we mainly do three things. One is to meet with nuclear utilities and other nuclear companies to explain to them how carbon pricing would help them and to get them on board with carbon pricing policies. We're also a source of expertise on nuclear within CCL. It includes a lot of people who have experience in the industry and connections. And we're basically there for CCLers to learn about nuclear, this presentation being one example for that. And then finally, another function is we provide guidance to CCL members on how to talk to members of Congress who are supportive of nuclear, how to speak to them and be effective with them, and maybe be able to get them on board with carbon pricing as well. I should say that recently CCL has kind of been branching out, not just carbon pricing anymore, and they've kind of come around to be more supportive of nuclear. Chapters and individuals now, it's okay to express support for nuclear and even say nuclear bills and things. So okay, I think with that done, we'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Asuru. Thank you, Salimi. This is an incredible opportunity for me. Citizens Climate Lobby, I joined about a year ago when CCL leadership started entertaining nuclear more seriously. And I've been enjoying my local Alameda chapter. We meet once a month. And so I'm just really happy to continue to network with the people on this call. And we've already made so much progress. And now we're seeing legislators in California get behind the carbon fee and dividend concept. So we look forward to continuing to lead here in California. For my presentation today, I'd like to take as many questions as possible, and I'd like to save those to the end. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or make a note of it. And I've allocated half of the time for audience participation. I know there's a lot that goes into this subject, so I look forward to discussing it openly with myself and with many of the other experts from the Nuclear Energy Action Team on the call today. So let's begin. Here's our agenda. I want to start with the challenge that lies ahead of us and kind of defining it in terms that we can understand. And then I'll be talking about the liftoff reports, which were published this year by the Department of Energy in the United States. And then we'll move on to opportunities for CCL advocacy. Really want to get this group's input on how we can change the conversation and update the narrative. And then we'll have time for audience questions. Okay, so my name is Ryan Pickering. I have been working in American electricity for the last 15 years. I studied it in undergrad at Loyola Marymount University, and then I went on to continue my studies at Stanford University, and now I'm currently at UC Berkeley as an independent researcher studying the energy transition. For the past 2 years, I've been working specifically on nuclear energy. I authored a report called The Real History of Diablo Canyon, which is where this picture was taken. That's California's currently the only nuclear power plant in California. I also volunteer at clean energy nonprofits, which I'll provide a shout out to at the end of this presentation. And as I mentioned, I'm a member of CCL's Alameda chapter. In the beginning of my career, I worked for 13 years designing rooftop solar power systems in the United States for a company called SunPower Corporation. I helped build over 7,000 rooftop solar power systems, and that's really defined my perspective on energy is coming from the solar side. So kind of the inside out, and I've now been learning about our macro energy systems over the past few years. I also spent 7 years living off grid in the unincorporated area of Los Angeles County called Topanga Canyon. And I was really dedicated to researching sustainability at a small scale, environmental justice, and energy. And that experience also shapes my perspective quite a bit. Okay, let's get into the challenge. So this graph from the EIA.gov, the United States agency that studies energy, states that, as things are currently going, we're seeing some growth in renewables, but out to 2050, we're really not seeing a change to our energy mix. Now, EIA is known to be very conservative, but this is the trajectory that we're trying to change. Obviously, this is an unacceptable outcome based on carbon modeling, based on energy security, based on energy poverty. There's a lot of reasons that we want to change this. And I'm so grateful that the federal government of the United States is taking an active stance to change this outcome. And this is the change they're looking to make. By pairing renewable energy with nuclear energy, we can squeeze coal out entirely, and we can dramatically reduce our reliance on natural gas and fossil oils. And so this is kind of the change that seems to be mathematically feasible over the next 25 years. And the United States has to lead. If the United States can't do it, then we can't expect other countries around the world to do it. So I look forward to showing you how this outcome can be made possible. So I want to get it out of the way first that there's sometimes quite a bit of chatter and sniping behind the scenes between different low carbon energy sources. And I will admit I have participated in some of that in the past. We're all trying to understand this energy challenge. And after 15 years of studying, I really believe that we're going to need all the different low carbon energy sources if we're going to push back against pollution, if we're going to push back against climate change, if we're going to push back against energy poverty. So, you can hold me accountable to advocating for all low carbon energy sources and methods in which they can work together efficiently and affordably. But for this presentation, we're going to be talking about one source of low carbon energy, and that is nuclear fission. And this photo is Diablo Canyon Power Plant, of which I've studied quite a bit. It's on the coast of Central California, and it has 2 reactors that were put online in 1985. And really some of the anti-nuclear movement was founded around protesting this plant. And I'll admit, growing up, I was anti-nuclear as well. And I felt that it was an unproven technology. But now today, we've learned quite a bit about the technology, and I look forward to sharing that with you. So obviously, you can see the 2 domes, and each one of those has a nuclear reactor inside of it. But that long rectangular building, well, for me, that's where the magic happens. That's where the electricity is generated. And so this is a photo of inside of that turbine hall. And you see, this is a 1.1 gigawatt electromagnetic steam turbine generator. So the steam created by the reactor spins these giant magnets, and it is the largest these are the largest generators in the state of California, and frankly, the largest generators in the world. Nuclear is capable of spinning very, very large magnets. And you can see one of the steam turbine trains here, and in the distance, there's a mirrored steam turbine on the other side, which is painted blue. All electricity is generated in this way, with the exception of photovoltaic energy or solar energy. So we're creating steam, spinning a turbine, whether we're burning fossils to do it, using hydro to do it, using the wind to do it, or using steam from nuclear fission. All electricity is generated by carefully spinning these magnets at 60 hertz and putting that on the grid. So when you hear about different technologies in nuclear, or even nuclear fission or nuclear fusion, just remember that the end result has to be spinning big electromagnetic generators. And here's a quick rundown of how that works. This is the most popular design in the United States. So you can see the reactors, you can see the turbine, and you can see the water that's used to create the pressure and the steam to spin those turbines. Okay, let's get into these liftoff reports. Now, these reports are really gaining in popularity. They were kind of a surprise to the public when they were first launched in March 2023. And the first report that was released was advanced nuclear. Now you can see there are 6 reports: advanced nuclear, carbon management, clean hydrogen, industrial decarbonization, long duration energy storage, and virtual power plants. Now, what you'll see is these technologies have been chosen by the Department of Energy because they're not taking off naturally. You know, industrial scale wind and solar, we don't need to write about that too much because those have already achieved commercial liftoff. What these reports are focused on is how do we get these stickier, more complex technologies that are also required to clean up our electricity system onto the grid. So I'll be reviewing the advanced nuclear report. All of them are available at liftoff.energy.gov. They all have executive summaries, which I recommend reading. They're about 4 pages long, and there's some really interesting overviews and market dynamics, and an enormous amount of work has gone into this, and I'm really proud to be an American and that my tax dollars have supported the creation of these documents that can be used by the public and the private sector as a common fact base to catalyze more rapid and coordinated action. Okay, and this is the logo for all of the liftoff reports, and I think it's a really cool logo. I've been trying to find who the artist is, haven't been able to figure that out, but it's supposed to represent our natural and built environment. You can see the cities, you can see natural spaces, you can see our different energy options, you can even see, you know, traditional oil and natural gas plants, as well as solar, wind, shipping, and nuclear plant. Now, as far as the advanced nuclear report goes, it's 62 pages, and most of the reports are around that size. There's a 4-page executive summary, and there are 33 figures or graphs with 63 references. And here are the authors. And I want to shout them out because I think that these documents are historic. They're incredibly well written. I'll say they're a bit dense, but they are capable. The public is able to understand them. Private investors are able to understand them. And once again, it provides a common fact base. The lead author of the Advanced Nuclear Report was Julie Kozeracki. And this is Julie. She has a 32-minute webinar on liftoff.energy.gov explaining her report. And what's fascinating about Julie is she just started studying nuclear 2 years ago. Now, she has a distinguished career as a business analyst, but when she joined the Department of Energy, they put this advanced nuclear challenge on her desk, and she went and read all the literature and really wrote a pretty epic report that both calls in the nuclear movement and says, hey, we all need to get together, and also calls out nuclear companies and others who are kind of working too slow and expecting too much. And she's really been on a tour recently admonishing utilities and admonishing people who are standing in the way of nuclear energy, not because of fear, but because they're saying it's too hard to build. And she's saying, look, I learned this whole business in 2 years. I think for people who have spent their careers working in nuclear energy, they can do a little bit better. And that the nuclear companies have a responsibility to communicate more clearly with the public so that we can rise to the challenge ahead. I actually got to meet Julie 2 weeks ago in New York during Climate Week, and I was totally starstruck. So you can hear from her on liftoff.energy.gov, and I look forward to reviewing her work. Now, how do you read this report? Well, you read it word by word. That's how I did it. But I will admit I'm a visual person, and thankfully, all the language of the report is simply narrating these figures or graphs. And I'm going to show you some of my favorite and I think the most impactful graphs. And while they may look challenging, you can understand them. Just stick with me. Okay, here's the first graph, and it's the second hardest to understand. So I challenge you all to put your thinking caps on. The first figure in the report shows that we need to build 200 gigawatts of new nuclear energy in the United States by 2050 in order to back up an enormous amount of wind and solar that's also coming to the grid. Wind and solar is miraculous, but it needs a firm backup partner in order to decarbonize the grid and transcend our need for burning fossil fuels. And so what this graph shows is there's 3 axes, and it shows cumulative gigawatts of 200 right at the top. So that's the goal by 2050. It shows each year, and then how many gigawatts per year we would need to build in order to get there. Now, thankfully, we've got some time, but not much. And I'm going to need everyone on this call's help in order for this to become a reality. And that might sound tongue in cheek, but it's true. We are the people who are going to make this happen. And so you can see we start humbly in 2030 with some of our first advanced reactors. And advanced reactors means any new nuclear reactor coming online. They all benefit from the space age computer technology that we've developed. And you can see it ramps, and we need to get that ramp to 13 gigawatts a year starting in 2033. And if we can ramp to that point, we're going to easily achieve this 200 gigawatt result that is necessary to decarbonize American electricity. So this build out represents a 200% increase to our current nuclear energy generation. So I don't take it lightly when I say that this would represent the largest low carbon energy build out in human history. I mean, this would represent the largest reduction of carbon that's ever occurred. So it's a challenge, and I think the United States is up for it. Okay, how are we going to do it? Well, we're in this tech demonstration phase right now, and what we need by the end of next year is a committed order book. Right now, we do not have enough of these purchase orders in for advanced reactors, and we're going to need to lean on the public to push their utilities and their legislators to get this order book in and really jumpstart this industry. Then we move on to project delivery and industrialization by 2050. So again, the immediate challenge ahead is the committed order book. And during our discussion at the end, I want to talk about how we can remedy that. Okay, now this is the hardest graph to understand. Okay, so this is all of your end of day concentration needs to go here. You have 2 scenarios. Now, on the left side of each scenario is our current energy system, 1.278 gigawatts of energy. That's how we currently make it. And that comes in 3 forms. There are 3 forms of electricity on our grid. Variable, that's your wind and solar. Non-clean firm, that's your fossil fuels burning on demand to spin big turbines. And then you have clean firm. So you have your hydroelectric, geothermal, and nuclear, which is on demand spinning big turbines. And you can see variable and clean firm are small currently. The majority of our energy comes from these non-clean firm sources. So we're going to phase those down. And the federal government doesn't feel that we can phase them out entirely, but we can really reduce how much we have of them. And there are two scenarios. On the left is the Department of Energy's preference. If we build 5 times our current clean firm capacity, so that's hydro, nuclear, and geothermal, then we don't have to build too much wind and solar at the top. Wind and solar is amazing, but it does have space constraints, land use constraints, transmission challenges, as well as material challenges. If we don't build 5x of clean firm and only build 3.5x, a worst case scenario on the right, you can see we have to build way more wind and solar. And while that's okay, it's going to create land use challenges, transmission challenges, and that's all going to result in much more expensive electricity. And I'm here trying to lower the cost of energy in the United States. That's a social justice issue to me. If we don't have abundant clean energy that is affordable, then that's going to put working class people at risk. So I'm here trying to push the left scenario and really grow our clean, firm resources. Okay, good job understanding that. So again, using nuclear to back up wind and solar leads to a more efficient transition to clean energy. All right, you guys got it. You folks are geniuses. Let's keep going. Okay, it's not just the Department of Energy or Loan Program Office saying this. You have a lot of universities, think tanks, other government agencies saying that we need to grow nuclear, and we hear that wind and solar is very affordable, so why do we need nuclear? That's easier. Well, for the reasons I explained, we need a clean, firm backup for wind and solar to operate on top of. And so you can see all of these different groups are saying, hey, we need to expand nuclear energy, and it's going to be hard. And public perception is the hardest challenge. And I think that's where this group can really lend a lot of national leadership. Okay. Here's another amazing graph from the report. And all of these graphs are from this advanced nuclear report. And it shows all of our different energy sources on the left, and it ranks them with all of these different boxes. And there's one energy source that checks all the boxes in green. And that's why they published the advanced nuclear report first, because it's clean. It is firm. It uses it has low land usage. We can use our existing transmission instead of building new wires. It has concentrated local benefits. It brings tons of jobs and tax revenue. And it has additional applications beyond electricity. It has all of these things, but what does it lack? It is not cost competitive today. And I would blame the nuclear industry for that from an economic standpoint, but also from a storytelling standpoint. They have not convinced the American public that this is the coolest thing since sliced bread, and therefore that's made development expensive because we're kind of in tension with the public and with legislators. So that's really the goal of this advanced nuclear report, is how do we get it cost competitive? Because we know if clean energy is cost competitive, that's how we're going to offset fossil fuels in a big and rapid way. Okay. I just want to take a step back and talk about uranium. Uranium is the fuel source of all modern reactors. We talk about thorium and plutonium as well, but uranium is going to be the backbone fuel for decades to come. And that's awesome because uranium is in every rock on Earth. And there are some really concentrated uranium fields in the United States and Canada. So there's an energy security aspect. It's also mined very prolifically in Australia and Kazakhstan and around the world. This is a secure energy source. And the way we mine it is called in situ. And there was a very serious mining accident in the Diné indigenous area of the Colorado Plateau when there was an open pit mine in the 1940s. We do not mine that way anymore. We actually use this in situ mining strategy where we pump a oxygenated water into the ground, and that water, uranium is soluble in water, and then we just pull it up, and then we recycle the water down again. So we pull the uranium out and all the other metals that it picks up, and then we pump the water back down. So this is very light water, and it has a very light land footprint as well. So there's a lot of concerns about uranium mining because of some of the past open mining techniques. We are no longer doing that. This is the primary way of mining uranium. And uranium has this amazing quality of being incredibly energy dense. So you've probably seen different illustrations of how much energy you can get out of a pound of uranium, and it's truly remarkable, orders of magnitude larger than any other energy source. And that leads to a very efficient use of land. And I think that's important, right? If we're trying to be environmentalists and preserve our wild spaces, then we should be mindful of how much our energy infrastructure takes up. And so you can see nuclear is incredibly land efficient. And we see this writ large at all American nuclear power plants, which have enormous wildlife preserves around them, including Diablo Canyon in California, which has one of the most prolific coastlines and adult fish, as well as inland we have condors, and it's just an incredible wildlife preserve. And I think the nuclear industry doesn't get enough credit for how much they've preserved wild spaces, especially around nuclear power plants. And I think that's because the nuclear industry is nervous to advocate for themselves, given how much public opposition they've received in the past. And hopefully that's going to change. Okay, we're about 2/3 through here. Thanks, everybody. I want to talk about the workforce. If we're talking about a just transition to clean energy, we have to talk about who is it employing. These are just some of the workers at a nuclear power plant in Minnesota. And you'll see nuclear employs the most people per gigawatt, and it also pays the most. And we can afford to do that in nuclear because we generate so much electricity. So, the benefits are spread out because we generate so much electricity. For example, the one nuclear power plant in California that sits on 5 acres powers 9% of all of the state's electricity. And so we can afford to hire over 1,000 people because it's so efficient, and we can afford to pay them very well too. So it's a nice aspect about the just transition. And we'll talk later about how do we get coal workers working in nuclear. Well, one way would be, the job titles are very similar, and we can give them a cleaner place to work and even better pay. So again, nuclear jobs are high-paying, generational positions. Nuclear power plants can last 100 years before they need to be rebuilt. And finally, they provide big tax revenue for local communities. You will find the communities surrounding nuclear power plants generally really like them. And that's because maybe they understand the science, maybe they know people that work there, but also because it produces millions of dollars in tax revenue. For example, in California, it's difficult to put your finger on it, but the local nuclear power plant in California generates $14 to $26 million in annual revenue. Tax revenue for the county, and most of that goes to infrastructure and schools. So it's got a lot of support in San Luis Obispo County, especially from the teachers unions and others, and unions that work on maintaining the infrastructure of the area. Okay, I don't want to go off too much of a tangent here, but the report is very clear that nuclear and an embrace of this technology can do more than just electricity. We can also make hydrogen out of it very efficiently. We can make process heat for industry, creating aluminum and steel and cement, these incredibly intense industries that we need heat for, and currently we burn fossils. Well, we could burn uranium instead, or fission uranium, I should say, and use the heat from that, not just to spin an electromagnetic turbine, but also to apply that heat directly to industrial processes. We can do desalination of water. In California, this is a big deal. District heating in our cold places. We can use a very small nuclear reactor and just pump carbon-free heat into cities and homes that have district heating. Off-grid power, we can use microreactors to replace diesel generators for remote places. And finally, craft propulsion. An enormous amount of oil is burned moving our ships around the world. And there is a lot of science going into putting small reactors to simply spin the propeller on big ships. So electricity is only 20% of American energy. We often think, oh, well, if we decarbonize electricity, then everything's solved. Well, it's actually only 20% of our emissions when it comes to energy. So nuclear helps with deep decarbonization. Now, I will say, I misspoke there. That 20% is the most polluting aspect of energy. Electricity, we put an enormous amount of carbon in the air in order to create that energy. But we have to find solutions that work beyond electricity. And we talk about electrification of everything, and that's going to take time, but it is, we'll probably never electrify everything. And we're going to need these other sources of heat to for deep decarbonization. Okay, almost finished here. There are a lot of different nuclear technologies out there. This really intimidates nuclear advocates because they think, well, shoot, which one do we advocate for? Well, I'm here to say, and I confirm this with Julie Kozeracki from the Department of Energy, she thinks we need 15 to 20 different reactor designs in the United States and around the world in order to decarbonize, because a lot of them can create electricity, but we also have these other applications. And thankfully, the market for electricity and energy is so large, we can support a number of different designs, and this actually makes the whole industry more resilient. This is a nuclear power plant that we recently finished in Georgia. You'll hear that it went over time and over budget. And that's true. This facility, though it is saving lives right now because we immediately reduced our need for coal in Georgia, a huge coal state, by building this Vogtle 3 and 4 reactors, it went way over time and way over budget. It was also the first of its kind. This was the first advanced reactor in the United States. And we learned a lot of lessons from it. And as challenging as it is to say, let's do it again, that's exactly what we need to do. Now, there are smaller reactors out there that we'll talk about, but these large reactors, they decarbonize at a big clip, and we can't turn our back on that technology. And we're also exporting this technology to come to places like Poland and Ukraine right now, who are trying to not only decarbonize, but also gain energy security. So with learn by doing, we can drive down the cost of advanced nuclear. This report studies why that project went so over budget, and they say that we can reduce the total cost by 64% of that plant if we do it a few more times. We have the labor, we have the supply chain, and I hope that we'll hear some announcements for more of this AP1000 technology soon. Okay, almost finished here. This also looks like a nuclear power plant because it has these big convex towers, but it's not. This is a coal plant. And you can always tell a coal plant because it has these large, thin chimneys, and that's where all the pollution is coming from. You can also see a big coal pile next to them. But coal built America, and it still powers over a third of the United States. And here's every coal plant currently in operation in the United States. These are the largest emitters of carbon in the world, other than China's coal fleet. So, we can point to a lot of progress we've made, but we have to find a functional solution to replace these. We also deserve, the people who work at these plants deserve a just transition. So how are we going to do it? Well, there are 220 active coal plants. And here's the Department of Energy's plan. We're going to upgrade these sites to nuclear power plants, the coal to nuclear upgrade. Because the workforce is there, because the transmission wires go to these sites, we can build a new nuclear reactor in the neighborhood. And when it's ready to turn on, we simply move the wires from the coal plant to the nuclear plant and move the workers from the coal plant to the nuclear plant. And this is the Department of Energy's big idea for rapid decarbonization and just transition. And there has been an enormous amount of study that's gone into this, and more tools are coming out every day. And frankly, I think it's a brilliant idea. It just doesn't leave anyone behind. And it really doesn't, we don't need to introduce energy to an area that's not used to it. These are sites that are ready to go. So what does this all look like? Well, here are the current nuclear power plants in our country. 95 gigawatts of nuclear, they're marked in red. The gray dots are decommissioned plants that could be, new plants could be built there. And the yellow ones are projects that are currently under construction. Well, here's one concept. And while this looks like blue chickenpox all over the United States, remember that currently all of those sites are coal plants that are releasing very dangerous pollution and carbon into the air, causing harm to humans and causing harm to the planet. And so once again, we've got this coal conundrum, and we can replace them with American nuclear technology over the next 25 years, completely decarbonizing our energy system in partnership with other renewables. This is what 300 gigawatts of American nuclear would look like. And sure, are all the spots going to be there? No. In fact, I think that states will start competing for this technology. And thankfully, nuclear is so powerful that we can send electricity hundreds of miles. So if Colorado wants to build 50 plants and export to all of their neighbors, well, that might be a functional way too. But if we're talking about energy security and economic opportunity, I would hope that lots of states would see the opportunity here and embrace this technology. These are what these advanced reactors look like. This is GE Hitachi's new reactor that they're hoping to build across the United States. The first ones will be in Ontario, Canada, and hopefully the Tennessee Valley Authority. As you can see, they're smaller, easier to build. Here's Westinghouse's reactor, same size as the GE. Also, Westinghouse and GE are major competitors. Again, a smaller reactor without the large convex towers, easier to build. Here's TerraPower's reactor that they're going to be building in Wyoming at an old coal plant. And this company is famously owned by Bill Gates. And not only is it a small reactor, it has a molten salt battery that helps it work in conjunction with wind and solar. Here's Holtec's small modular reactor, a new design that just came out recently. And there are even micronuclear plants for more remote areas like Alaska. Here's the Westinghouse model. This model will also be built on campus at the University of Pennsylvania. And here is another microreactor that's going to be built on campus at the University of Illinois. So, almost finished here, but this is where I get a lot of optimism from, is nuclear energy is really increasing in popularity nationally and from a bipartisan standpoint. You know, I really try not to get politics involved when I talk about energy, because we all share the energy grid and we all need clean energy. And so you can see that US adults are increasing their support for nuclear, and definitively for the first time, nuclear energy is supported by all Americans, a majority of Americans, excuse me. So I think this is a really exciting trend, and I'd love to continue that bipartisan support when we're talking about this in state houses and the federal government. Okay, some open questions, and then we'll go to questions, but some things I'm thinking about is how can we improve the national conversation around nuclear energy? I mean, this thing is so taboo, we can hardly talk about it at a dinner party. What's it gonna take for this conversation to really start putting some roots down? Next, how can we push utility companies to make these orders? We are not going to see commercial liftoff if we don't put orders in. How can we hold utility companies accountable? How can we get them excited about this energy that they definitely need? I think it has to do with public support. And finally, the workforce. This is a really scary challenge to me, because currently the nuclear industry in the United States supports about 100,000 people. Well, in order to build 200 gigawatts of nuclear by 2050, we would need 375,000. So we would need to add 275,000 people into this industry in the next 25 years. How can we inspire young people to join this sector? And some opportunities for citizens climate lobby. If what I'm saying resonates with you, here's some action items you can do. And I should have put number 5 first. Join the Nuclear Energy Action Team. Jim Hoff and Asuru are some of the top minds in American nuclear, and we're learning that it doesn't take a ton of people to get this thing going. People want nuclear energy, and thankfully with leaders like Jim and Asuru, we, and hopefully myself as I get more involved, we can really make effective change. Because we need to contact our elected representatives at the federal level. We need to open this dialogue, because when you call a federal representative and say, hey, I want to talk about nuclear energy, it gives them the oxygen to take what you're saying onward. And in the past, nuclear just hasn't been part of the conversation. We need to change that. If we're going to listen to the scientists who have been studying this and saying we definitely need clean, firm energy, well, we need to take that and we need to bring it to our federal representatives so that they can speak for us. We can also voice support for the ADVANCE Act. There is a bipartisan piece of legislation in Washington, D.C. right now to accelerate the goals laid out in this liftoff report. That is a very clear action item that you can voice to your elected representatives in the House and Senate. I think we should also pressure fossil fuel companies to invest in nuclear. We're all pretty upset at fossil fuel companies, but they've got the purse strings to push this forward. And we're already seeing fossil fuel companies invest in wind and solar because it's popular. Well, what's it going to take to invest in nuclear for them? I think it's about public support as well. They would need to improve their press releases and bottom lines. And thankfully, I've met a lot of people in oil and gas who are really interested in nuclear and see its functionality, the firmness, its dispatchability. So we'd love to see that. And I think we should encourage it. We should also call your state representatives and talk to them about, is nuclear energy part of our state's clean energy plan? And you'll find a lot of them do not have it because it hasn't been popular. They're like, no, we're going to do it with wind and solar. And we're seeing that idea is coming to an end because it's has some functionality challenges and some affordability challenges. So once again, by speaking for nuclear energy to your state representatives, well, they can carry that onward and add nuclear energy into our state energy plans. Here are some additional resources for everyone. And I want to thank all of them for their mentorship. I've learned so much from these groups. And I've learned so much from Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to advocate for this technology on this platform. And I look forward to a robust discussion on how we can integrate it into our advocacy work moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. That was super awesome. So we have a couple of questions that from the chat. I'll get that started, but if you want to raise your hand, you will be called upon next. One of the questions that is in the chat that comes up again and again in nuclear is the waste issue. So what about the waste? Should we be worried? Is it going to be there forever? Is it going to kill us all?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about this because it was one of the reasons I was anti-nuclear. Is we hear about nuclear waste, we hear about on The Simpsons, we hear it created Godzilla. And so I really wanted to get to the bottom of it. And it's one of the first things I researched in this space. And what I found is that nuclear waste has not hurt anyone in the world because we know exactly what it is and they're contained in canisters. Now, there was issues with nuclear waste from our weapons program early on, but those issues have been mitigated. But waste from nuclear energy is concealed in a metal and concrete canister, and those are sitting at sites around the country. And the federal government now has a consent-based siting plan that they're working with communities on to store this waste until we're ready to reprocess it. And the reprocessing nuclear waste into new fuel is tremendously complex from a scientific standpoint, and we need more public consensus to get behind it. But essentially, every spent nuclear fuel canister can be made into new fuel. And by refissioning it over and over again, we can reduce it all the way to just ore that's not dangerous at all. So if we care about future generations and we we don't like that nuclear waste lasts 10,000 years. Well, that's because there's still so much potential energy left in it. And if we continue to use that potential energy, we can solve the problem of nuclear waste and gain energy security and affordable clean energy for Americans and for our allies around the world.
Thank you. Frank.
Yeah, thanks. I also wanted to just quick mention that for years and years, the Navy has been reprocessing spent fuel from submarines. Certainly, it's not going to be on the same scale that's needed, but it's already being done. But my question involves permitting. How much of the overruns at the plant in Georgia were due to permitting? I know in Congress there's a lot of concern over permitting power lines, because without new power lines, wind and solar aren't going anywhere. So that's my, and let me just add one other thing. If these new plants don't require water, a huge water source, and permitting is an issue, why couldn't we base these plants on federal military facilities? Where I don't know if permitting is an issue there or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. As far as permitting goes, I think a lot of that can be solved from this coal to nuclear transition. Permitting was not a major cost challenge in Georgia. The local community supported it. The challenge was we began construction on it before we had finalized the design. And we also, rumor has it that they chose the cheapest vendor to build the project, and that vendor went out of business, and then they had to go back on hands and knees to the most expensive developer and have them build it. So, there were some business mistakes as well. But also, we were still stepping up the supply chain. We had never built this before. This is a cathedral of American innovation. And though it went too over budget and over time, when we think about how significant the AP1000 that we built in Georgia was, it's a tremendous accomplishment, and we can build it again. And there are a lot of sites that currently have a combined operating license ready, and we could break ground on them tomorrow if there was political will. So I think we should address the low-hanging fruit first and get our confidence back on these sites that are ready to go. And then we can kind of work our way up the tree and build more difficult ones. But there are 10 sites that we could build this technology immediately and save American lives. Right. And then as far as the government goes, they'll continue to be involved, especially with micronuclear. We're seeing the military be very interested in that.
Yeah, actually, I just want to put interject here. The military actually has commissioned two reactor types to make mobile micro reactors. So if you think about war zones, the biggest challenge that they have is lugging all the fuel and the water to these remote sites. And so if you have like the energy density that Ryan talked about, if you can pack all that energy into a backpack, that's crazy, right? Like, and that gives them so much more whatever to do the things that militaries do. So there's two projects they're called Project Pele, PELE, that is commissioned 2 reactor developers. Mike.
Okay, thank you. And Ryan, wonderful presentation, very enlightening. Thank you. But now I have a couple of colleagues that have been involved with the regulatory world and for quite a while. And I'm trying to make the case for nuclear when I talk with them. And their take on the energy transition is that distributed power has much more potential than people think. And an example might be rooftop solar with an EV and its batteries as a backup. And they argue that we don't need as much centralized utility scale power as people think. What do you think about that, Ryan? Is is that a valid view, or is it something that, in your experience, is relatively marginal?
It's certainly a view that I held for many years. And what I've learned is the grid is not this ubiquitous place. You know, if you make a little power here, it doesn't magically appear 500 miles away. It's not this giant pond of energy. So the transmission challenge is unbelievably complex. And this is the largest machine in the world, by the way. The American power grid is the largest machine. And what we're seeing is, you know, we built the American grid, if you imagine a tree with this central generation of coal, that was the trunk, and it would go out to the leaves. And now this idea of, hey, let's just make the leaves generate power and we can somehow come inward and power the trunk of our industrial generation. It might work for these grid edge communities, but it really doesn't come to the center and power our industrial needs. So I generally find that those people just maybe aren't looking in depth about how much energy we really use as an industrialized society, and why that's okay if we pair it with clean, firm power sources. So I just find that patience and maybe zooming out and showing how much energy we really use can kind of can provide some context to that.
Maybe I'll add to that. You know, for houses, it probably makes sense to do solar on your roof, but and for some industries or some communities, it might make sense to have like smaller modular reactors for that community, for that local grid, as opposed to kind of centralized one further up. But like, these are not things that we need to predetermine or we need to kind of pontificate upon. I think we should let all technologies compete on a level playing field so that we can figure out the best solution for everybody. So Edgar and then Brad after that.
Hi, thanks for the thanks for the presentation. Two questions about perceived future electric demand. First one is synthetic fuels. Are we ever going to do something along those lines? Because if we're going to replace jet fuel with something that doesn't have fossil carbon in it, that's going to be a big deal. If we're going to tell people they have to junk their existing automobiles and trucks and chainsaws and everything else, that's going to be a hard sell, I would imagine. But it's, you know, thermodynamically, it's huge energy source demand. So when we think about building a grid, redoing the grid, we're going to have to include something like that if we intend to do it. The other one is direct air capture. I don't know how much it costs to do direct air capture in terms of how much electricity gets you, how much carbon dioxide. But I took a couple of guesses and I came up with we could reduce the CO2 concentration in the air by 120 parts per million, which is roughly what we've added since the dawn of industrialization. And that would take 200 Diablo Canyons running 24/7 for 100 years.
Yep.
Doesn't have to, it's not site specific, but that's a hell of a lot of nuclear reactors.
Yeah, those are both deeply interesting to me. I like synthetic fuels, and what synthetic fuels are is this idea that we can create hydrogen and then mix it with carbon to create hydrocarbon chains that will function, and we can custom build gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, these things that are very necessary in our lives. And in fact, the tailpipe emissions from those things are less of a concern than the whole extractive fossil fuel technology infrastructure. And so if we can make these clean synthetic fuels, maybe we can get a lot more life out of our internal combustion engines, which are quite efficient. And then carbon capture, well, we can capture carbon out of the sky, and then we can use it with this hydrogen and make the fuels that we need. We can also even make it into carbonated water and all kinds of things. This is an enormous area of research. I think there are a lot of ways to draw carbon out of the sky. We're seeing things about the ocean, and there will be a lot of moving science on this. And Edgar, I look forward for you watchdogging this into existence. I think there's also going to be a lot of greenwashing and things like that as well. But all of these things require just enormous amounts of clean energy. Enormous, right? And so that's really, for me, what changed my mind about nuclear is when you see like, oh gosh, we got to pull carbon out of the sky, we got to make synthetic fuels, and making that with wind and solar, it's possible, very expensive, and really still keeps us in need of fossil backup. And so this clean, firm backup of nuclear really enables those things. And I think we got to work on public perception first. And then I agree, we got to build hundreds of these reactors across the United States for a variety of different uses.
One other thing that a lot of people are not paying attention to, I think, is sequestration of carbon dioxide by holding it underground under pressure. Anybody who's got access to Wikipedia can look up the Lake Nyos disaster. It's a carbon dioxide ejection that killed 1,500, 2,500 people and a whole bunch of cattle in Africa. And this is because carbon dioxide is heavier than air, so when it goes up, it comes back down and suffocates whatever happens to be around it. And if you want sequestration places anywhere near your home, you might want to think twice.
Thanks, Edgar.
Ryan, I'd like to add something.
Sure.
Syn fuels is a thermal application. There are a lot of other high temperature and heat applications in industry. Even DAC, I learned, is actually a lot of it's thermal versus electric. And I just want to point out that, nuclear produces heat like solar and wind do not. And meanwhile, if you're trying to generate power, you actually lose 2/3 to half of your heat when you try to do that thermodynamic cycle. What I'm getting at is that nuclear will be inherently more competitive, relatively speaking, for heat applications than for electricity applications. And Ryan pointed out a lot of our overall CO2 is from heat applications. So nuclear is going to have a leg up on whether you're generating hydrogen, syn fuels, DAC. Analyses are showing that nuclear is likely to be the most economic clean option because it's one of the few clean sources that produces heat. Geothermal is the only other one, and that's probably limited. So there's a really bright future for nuclear in industrial process heat, the things you mentioned. And I should mention that this is one area where industry is actually moving forward. Dow Chemical, of its own volition, is moving forward with using HTGR reactors, like 4 100 megawatt HTGR reactors at one of their major facilities to replace fossil heat inputs. And they're pursuing this on their own. Like, Ryan's talking about this order book. You could consider this, where the industry itself is starting to think about this because they know they're going to have to decarbonize at some point. And there's recognition that having a thermal clean source is probably a superior option. So.
Jim, is there a reactor that can get really, really high temperatures?
Yes. There are a few of them. Like some of the molten salt ones I think can get pretty hot, but the one most talked about is the HTGR. It's got like graphite, a graphite core, and it has helium gas as a coolant.
Ooh.
Why don't we move to Brad and come back to you, Edgar? Brad's had his hand up for a bit.
Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion group, and Ryan, I think you've done a great job of putting this together. I have a question. I worked at Lawrence Livermore Lab for much of my career, but also at Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So I got a couple of comments about that. And one thing I'm curious about, the new advanced plants that you showed from these different organizations. I was involved in severe accident work a lot, like most of us were. And I'm curious about if there's not a need for cooling towers and water sources. Some of the coal plants comment, it seems like a very ingenious idea to replace coal plants with nuclear for the reasons you gave. I'd never heard that before, and that sounds pretty exciting. But, you know, the nuclear plants generally have been located close to water sources for safety reasons and for just cooling of the plant. So I'm just curious about the designs you showed that didn't have the long, tall towers.
Yeah, you know, if you look closely at some of them, you'll see these shorter condensers. And they're doing that to reduce costs and maintenance. Apparently, cleaning those convex towers and keeping them mildew free and things like that is a challenge. So, yeah, you will, most of them will still have steam coming out of them, but these are just, you know, 15 foot tall condensers with lots of fans on them. They do consume more electricity when you do it like that. It's a more active cooling source instead of the passive convex tower. I think this is for a variety of reasons. You know, for one, those towers cost a lot to build. And number two, there is a perception that communities don't want to see those towers, and that a shorter tower would help with public perception. So I think that's where things are going. But obviously Vogtle, which just went online, has 2 large convex towers that are built just for those new reactors. So I think we'll see that as well. I think also that's the microreactors that aren't using as much water or any water because they have some different metal cooling and things like that. But we will still see high water use, and that's the beauty of coal, is because all of these coal plants have access to a cooling source as well. So thank you for your service and working for the NRC, and yeah, hopefully we can all help out with this coal to nuclear transition.
Could I offer one more thought too?
Sure,
I
Brad.
had a good friend. I'm a graduate of Berkeley Engineering and spent quite a few years there too. And one of my best friends worked on fusion for his whole career. He was more of a physicist. And I just visited him about 2 weeks ago. I live in Florida now, but I went on a trip to California to visit friends. And I talked to him about fusion, and it's an exciting prospect for the future, but I don't think it's anywhere near in the near term enough to help us with the climate issue. I wish it was, but I also had a nice talk today with Lisa Ruckman. I noticed she was involved here, connected for a while, but I asked her about the conversations that we could have with the conservatives, because the CCL has a wonderful program on how to communicate to conservatives to try to convince them to vote differently. And she brought out something that I'm reminded of here, is that if you can talk to somebody who's more business oriented and try to convince them of the economic benefits of the innovation of the renewables, but also that the nuclear aspect might be a way to get more of the conservatives to support this. But
Thank you, Brad. Yeah, I think fusion is you know, like I said, it's just about spinning big electromagnetic turbines. And I'm here to just say, like, what's the most cost-effective option, you know, to do that? As long as it's safe and it's thought out and passed by the NRC, then it's all fine with me. So, and then, yeah, I think this is the bipartisan issue of our time. And I hope to work on this for the rest of my career. And I hope that we can, you know, just come to find some common ground here, because I think we can all benefit from nuclear energy. So I hold myself accountable to just reaching across the aisle and really maybe transcending the aisle and just talking about, hey, we're just looking for abundant, reliable, clean energy for all Americans.
So
sorry to break in, but can we, will we have be able to get a copy of your presentation, Ryan?
Sure. Thanks for asking.
we're gonna put your email in the chat. We'll make sure to get you the slides, but we'll also post the recording on the Florida CCL chapter. So one thing I wanted to raise before people leave, because we are at the top of the hour, on November 3rd, at the fall virtual conference of CCL, there's an action team fair. And if anybody wants to kind of sit around virtually in the nuclear action team fair, maybe answer some questions, maybe raise some questions, talk to people about kind of where you are. You don't have to be pro-nuclear, but at least nuclear curious. If you want to drop your email in the chat again, we'd appreciate that.
Yes, please.
Len.
Len, I see your question. Smaller reactors can use air cooling instead of water cooling. Their surface volume ratios are better. That frees them from needing a water source. Yes, that's the benefit. One of the benefits of these smaller reactors. I support all reactor sizes, the gigawatt size, the megawatt size, even the single megawatt. And but because we have this incredible array of American technologies here, we can, like I said, start with the low-hanging fruit and work our way up as we gain confidence. And these reactors that don't require as much or any water will really help us on these grid edge communities that still need an enormous amount of power. Thank you, Len. Okay, well, wow. Thanks, Suru, for answering so many of the questions in the chat. I did my best to get all my research of the last 2 years into this one presentation, and I appreciate everyone sticking with us. I'm happy to answer a few more questions, but I'm sure folks will want to be wrapping up here pretty soon. I see Phil Carlson asking about Gen 4 reactors don't require as much water cooling because of thermodynamics. I see Eric with his hand raised. Eric?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Great presentation, Ryan. Really fantastic, and you really absorbed a lot of information on a DOE report. That was dense. So excellent work. I ask everybody in the space, what are your thoughts on the Inflation Reduction Act? I think some people love it, some people hate it, some people are, well, it's mixed feelings. And I'll also, just to tell everybody here, if people are interested in these sort of things, there's an upcoming debate on electric vehicles in New York at the thing called the Soho Forum. You can see it virtually, so I'll put it in the chat.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, certainly electric vehicles are tipping the scale towards a lot of these decisions and our need for clean, firm energy, because, we want to plug those things in when we want to plug them in. I've been critical of the Inflation Reduction Act, but then I read it and I liked it a little bit more. And what I like about it is that it evens the playing field of subsidies between energy sources. In the past, I've felt like we've incentivized wind and solar too much because it's a variable power source. It can, wind and solar can only do so much for our energy system. What I like is that all of these incentives for low carbon energy by 2025, they're all going to be at an even playing field. And I think that's appropriate. And, say what you will about market dynamics, but in many ways they work. And so if we even the playing field, even amongst fossil fuels, I think that we'll get a nice, healthy mix of energy resources.
A lot of requests about the liftoff. I'll put a new chart book that Nuclear New York consolidated in the chat that has a lot of the charts, a lot of the key charts.
Nice.
But yeah, go to liftoff.energy.gov. That's got all the reports, and I beyond the nuclear one, which is my favorite, but the other ones are excellent too. Edgar. We can hear you.
Edgar, you're muted.
Thank you. It's come to my attention that fossil fuels don't just promote wind and solar. They do so because they absolutely hate nuclear. To the extent that they're actually they are financially supporting several of the green organizations, Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace come to mind. if you look up a thing called DOERR, DOER, School for Sustainability at Stanford, it's tremendous. They'll work with anybody in fossil fuels. So they're putting their mouth where their profits are. And you can't necessarily blame them for that, although it's sort of a short game they're playing, because if we destroy the earth, it's not doesn't matter how much money your investments make.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see that a lot. The fossil fuel industry is enormous, and there are a lot of different people in it and different views. And so I think it's important to remember that they don't move as one. There are a lot of young people in the fossil fuel industry that want to get into nuclear. They're excellent engineers who build fracking wells today. And whatever they think about climate change, some of them take it very seriously. Others just think, hey, we're running out of fossils, and we want to keep working. So what are we going to build? And they want to use their engineering talent for nuclear. And they're just saying, hey, do you guys have any reactors for us? And so, I think that nuclear needs to compete. I think that we've kind of just been like, oh, woe is us. And if only we had more subsidies or something, or if only people liked us more. I don't think people are going to, I come from the solar industry, and we had to dig this thing out of the mud. We had to convince people that this was real. And now everyone's saying, oh yeah, you're going to power the world. And we're like, whoa, we didn't mean it that much. But, we have to tell a better story, and we have to learn from renewables about this. They kind of have this, we call it cowboy solar, where we're like, yeah, just get the panels up there. We just got to get it going. And so I think if we have a more competitive spirit, I think we'll attract more talent, and, business is going to be what it is. And yeah, sure, the Rockefeller Institute 50 years ago released a fictitious report about the dangers of radiation. And how insidious was that? Who knows? I just consider it competition, and so I try to dare the nuclear industry, like, yeah, we're going to be attacked at every angle. The energy industry is one of the largest industries in the world. These decisions matter. There are big bucks attached to this. So do better, tell a better story, and get into the market and compete and drive down costs, because we're not going to get off of fossils through virtue signaling and subsidies. We're going to get off of fossils by beating them on price. That, to me, is my theory of how we win. And thankfully, fossils are going to continue to get more expensive as it's harder to extract, and through these, different taxes that we've put on them. But we need to compete and drive down prices, and nuclear energy has that opportunity because of the energy density.
Hey, Ryan, this is Tom Roush. I've been involved in CCL quite a while. I'm a retired nuclear engineer and a healthcare radiation safety officer. And the thing I see that's most pernicious is continually conflating variable renewable energy with nuclear power. We just added 3 gigawatts of solar and wind, therefore we can shut down 3 gigawatts of nuclear. Never mind the fact that in Portland area, they got 6% capacity factor out of wind during a really cold spell. And you just can't rely on it. And there's some good reports out there showing that we're about three plus orders of magnitude short on the kind of storage we're talking about. And that's a tough thing that we got to get out there, but we got to break that link between renewables are so cheap that we can cut nuclear. We got to break that link, because it's just full of oil. And that report that, the Liftoff, it's implicit in there, but it's also buried.
Yeah, I think
difficult thing to explain. Go ahead, Asuru.
Yeah, one thing. So if you saw in the hardest chart that Ryan showed was the need for firm clean generation at the bottom of that, and the firm clean generation, the Liftoff says, comes in 3 are kind of possible contenders for that. That's nuclear, which we were talked about today. That's renewable plus storage, and that's gas with carbon capture and sequestration. And the cost of the first of a kind for all of these is expensive, as the Vogel plant has shown. But as you deploy these solutions, the costs come down, much like we saw in solar, wind, batteries, and fracking. Like you keep on doing it, and you keep on learning, and you keep on making the kind of better technological choices, better materials, better know-how, etc. And that's how all the nuclear deployments around the world have, successful deployments around the world have happened, is by kind of replicating the same design multiple times. And we see that from Vogtle 2 to Vogtle 3 to Vogtle 4, the cost savings. But most impressive is kind of South Korean deployments in the UAE, and the Indian deployments in India, domestic Indian nuclear technology that they are doing really cheap, really fast, and very good for the consumers.
Yeah, and you know, I'm guilty of this, like gigawatt of solar equals a gigawatt of anything else. Coming from the solar industry, I used to oversimplify it as well. And I think talking about clean firm is important. I think talking about nuclear serving a different function on the grid is maybe important. Just saying, oh yeah, that's great. Nuclear does something different because it provides firm energy, and trying not to equate these and just refusing this apples and oranges comparison. And I think the last thing is these companies like Microsoft signing 24/7 clean energy commitments is a way that industry is holding it accountable, because they're saying, hey, we're not going to do this thing anywhere where we just buy random energy and say that we're 100% offset. They're holding themselves accountable to 24/7 offsetting. And I think that's another way that we can hold this accountable and make sure that we have a reliable system. So yeah, thank you. And Tom, we're going to have to continue to do a lot of work on that. This energy blindness that we have nationwide and worldwide is a challenge. You know, it's hard to understand this very complex and balanced system.
And it's in every green movement. It's buried in CCL fairly deeply. And you know, I gently try to push back, especially against people that have high regard. You say, you can't keep doing this. You know, you just can't do it. But they do it anyway. I'm so impressed with CCL. Jim, you had a lot to do with that, but I think all of us, and Suru too, changing their position. When I went to Congress in June, like several other of us, and the 3 of the 4 members of Congress I met with were really impressed that CCL now officially supports nuclear, and they're all Democratic.
Yeah, I think I like the story of people changing their mind. I changed my mind on nuclear, and I think it makes us more effective advocates, actually. And you know, that's all part of life, and it shows a humility and a curiosity. And we just, I think that's a better ethic to be putting out there than like, you guys don't understand this, because I'm tempted to do that.
Yes.
And it just, we have to have a spirit of patience, because this is complex and we are the stewards, whether we like it or not. We understand this at a deep level, and we have a duty to bring that to the public.
Wayne.
Mr. Harden has a comment. He's been raising his hand for a long time.
Well, thank you.
Go to
I have a
Wayne.
couple of questions, and now somebody else has their hand up too.
No, go ahead.
Want to go first, and I'll go after them?
Wayne hasn't asked a question yet, so I'd love to hear from him.
Okay, real quick, I just would like to get some numbers, some cost numbers. I know that we're still on the learning curve and production economies, and you have to allocate or amortize the large capital cost across the cost of production. But what numbers can you use for the cost of generation? Let's say currently in a couple of years, and then maybe in the 5 to 10 year frame. Are we talking about 30 cents a kilowatt hour, 10 cents a kilowatt hour? You know, what's the order of magnitude here?
Well, when Julie Kozeracki in New York, she set a very high bar. But yeah, this is very theoretical. MIT published a very good study on the AP1000 and what that would cost if we were to do it again. It was by Shervan et al. And he said that we could get the price down to $4 a kilowatt. So what would that result in? That would probably result in about $80 a megawatt hour, which is or 8 cents a kilowatt hour, which is very competitive. Julie Kozeracki put the rooftop at $150 a megawatt hour, or 15 cents. She said you can't go over that bar. Everything has to be below that. Right. And That's actually higher than a lot of the nuclear industry claims, because I think the nuclear industry just wants to claim a really low number to get these contracts off the gate. But we are hearing the federal government say that there's unlimited demand at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Unlimited. If you can get to that number, we'll build as much nuclear. And there are premium demand from like Microsoft and demand centers who are holding themselves this 24/7 carbon at up to 15 cents a kilowatt hour or $150 a megawatt hour. So those are the kind of the ranges we're talking about. And obviously classic nuclear plants are generating power as low as 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour today, like that in Browns Ferry, Tennessee, or Point Beach in Wisconsin. These are just once you get these things paid off, they're like free energy devices practically. So 3 cents a kilowatt hour, that's the goal, certainly.
Thank you very much for that. That's awesome. And I'll just point out that a carbon fee and dividend will drive that adoption and get that order book moving more quickly.
Yeah, you're right. And I haven't connected those dots yet, but I think we should work on that in the Nuclear Energy Action Team.
So this is what's in the liftoff study. What they show is the first of a kind deployment is in the kind of $120 per megawatt hour kind of range for all these kind of firm clean technologies. But as you deploy them, like 5 to 10 where she thinks, or the liftoff study thinks, we'll get to these kind of levels. So this is 7 cents per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. Thank you.
Brad.
Yes, I was puzzled to see the results that you showed about the attitude of the Republicans versus Democrats on nuclear. I would have thought it was just the other way around, but here in Florida, I'm the chapter leader for CCL in Venice, and I've been involved in a number of interviews with our elected officials, trying to convince them of the really absolute necessity of what CCL wants to do. And I think the conclusion that you come to is that we have to get different people elected into office. Those people that are elected now are set against protecting the large amounts of money that get donated from the fossil fuel industry. So I'm a little bit dubious. I think that the public, Republicans in public, might think that nuclear could help, and we need to convince them of the safety of it, which I think we can do if we publicize more about how they're licensed and the studies that are done to show that they're safe compared to every time they get in their car and go anywhere. But I think we're going to have to get new people elected into office in order to really make this go, because protections of the fossil fuel is very powerful lobbies, of course.
I would contend that, Brad, the biggest champion of nuclear in Congress is Florida Representative Byron Donalds from Florida 19. He's been introducing bipartisan legislation left and right and passing them and getting kind of adjusting other bills to make them more technology neutral. We in fact had Byron Donalds chief of staff, legislative aide present to the Nuclear Energy Action Team about a month ago. If you can find that, Solemi, can you put the link in the chat?
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I think he should be praised for that. But as you know, Ron DeSantis is really promoting dealing with the climate change with adjusting to it and a mitigation, rather than really dealing with it in the way it has to be done by reducing our carbon. And so the Republican leaders may still be an issue till we get them out of office.
Just a few points. One of the reasons why CCL has become more receptive to nuclear is that conservatives are expressing a lot of interest. And as you know, CCL tries to work with conservatives maybe more than a lot of environmental groups. There will be one or two reasons why Republicans might come out in support of nuclear, and one is that they might just support it even though there's not a climate aspect, right? They might just, a lot of them appear to be supportive of nuclear, even if you don't invoke the climate reason for it. And then the final theory might be is that if Republicans ever do decide to do, like anything, right, about climate, there's a good chance they'll be very interested in nuclear. It just rings their bells better. It might even simply be a way to differentiate themselves from the progressive wing, of the Democratic Party. But there's a lot of potential support for nuclear among conservatives, whether it's in the name of climate or not. So
we'll see. But could I ask a question too? I'm sure that you know that Pierre Trudeau in Canada announced several years ago the energy innovation and carbon dividend approach that they'd use in British Columbia was so successful, he wanted to institute it throughout the country. And we haven't seen that, and I think we know why. There must be huge lobbying against that in his country, but does anybody know what the status of this is in Canada?
Yes, it was introduced, Brad, in 2018. And people are already receiving their dividend. And I want to point out, Brad, about, who we need to get in office. I mean, we cannot be thinking about who is in office, but try to be working with whoever we have and who our representatives are. Because if we're going to wait, there's no time to wait to be acting this solution and be talking to our representative and finding common ground. And I feel like nuclear, Byron Donalds is my representative. And we find common ground, and he have legislation with nuclear. He have legislation that it's bipartisan, and also have other legislation. Pat is from my chapter as well. We're trying to work out with a water quality, water quality bill, funding for grants and funding for water quality, natural-based solutions. So even though if they're Republicans and, politics is something else, I mean, the relationship we have with those offices is always going to be finding common ground and see how we can advance. And, when election comes, we do what we have to do. But when elections don't happen, this is the way we work with them, and always striving for that common ground, because we don't have time for inaction.
And I really point out to nuclear as being in this partisan age, nuclear may be the most bipartisan thing that's happening in Congress today. So the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, co-sponsored by Senators Manchin and Risch, Republican from Idaho, passed in the Senate by 96-3. I mean, what other issue in the United States today can pass 96-3? Tell me.
Here's another example. There was a Defense Something Act, and there were these amendments, and all of them went down to defeat, except for two Donald's amendments that were pro-nuclear. That was the one thing that the Democrats and the Republicans both agreed on. That was the only amendments that the Republicans and Democrats agreed on, were two pro-nuclear amendments by Byron Donalds.
Phil, love to hear from you.
Phil, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ryan, for this great seminar. I have a couple quick points that you guys might want to weigh in on. First of all, nuclear moratoriums in the states. That's low-hanging fruit. We've got to deal with that. Interestingly, in Illinois, the major thing that flipped Illinois was having labor involved, and they did a wonderful job getting a pretty resistant state. The veto session is coming up because Pritzker did veto that. Hopefully that can be overridden, number one. Number two, fission and fusion, two fantastic technologies. I wonder how much are they competing for investment right now? We've got some Helion, and I can't remember if it's Microsoft or some other, they're saying they're going to have a power plant up in 2030, a multiple 100 megawatt fusion plant using high temperature superconductors. So maybe we are right around the corner on fusion. And are people going to want to put the brakes on these big investments in fission plants? Because fusion is really getting big headlines these days. See what you guys think about that.
Yes. Phil, first of all, thank you for all your advocacy online and your support. And I really liked your comment on the internet about identifying as pro-nuclear environmentalists. I thought that's something that I'm going to adopt. And something else I should have included in the presentation is these nuclear moratoriums. It's a favorite topic of mine here in California, and we're working to overcome our moratorium in California as well. And we hope that will provide, win or lose, we hope that will influence the national conversation. I think this is a fun thing that we should all be doing. And I kind of mentioned it, call your state representative, and is nuclear part of the solution or not, and why not? And Julie Kozeracki, the author of this report, has said that is a major issue. These public utility commissions, how can we make progress as a nation if it's not happening at the state level? And the states really do have a lot of control over their energy future. And so, point taken, and I think I'll update my slide to mention these moratoriums because it is a major obstacle. The moratoriums and then these public utility commissions, just not, even if in states like Michigan where nuclear is legal, nuclear is not part of the future energy program. So we got to soften that up. And then as far as fission and fusion, Isuru calls it the fusion confusion, which I think is good. It is a challenge. I like big, beautiful fission reactors because that's what's available today. And, we need energy right now. I don't have a good talk track when it comes to this. Like sometimes I'm like, it's all of the above, whatever can spin the electromagnetic turbine generator the cheapest wins, but I would be surprised if fusion, I think for me, fusion on a good day is acting like fission, like I don't see any problem with fission. So in many ways, I think fusion advocacy is often anti-nuclear because it says, hey, what we have right now isn't good enough. So I think we are at some serious risk of that, Phil, and the words are so close, we make so many mistakes. I don't know. I'd look to Suru and Jim for more advice, but for me, I keep the core of my advocacy for large fission plants, and I think that benefits the whole movement. Because if you don't like that, then you got all these other options. But that's kind of the hardest one to like right now, and it's what we have today, and it defends our current plants and allows us to build more large ones. And I think it moves the Overton window in an appropriate way.
Maybe I'll opine on this. I'm for all technologies, and it's a technology readiness level. So that's, solar and wind is ready to be deployed today. We should be deploying that today. If fission is ready to be deployed today, we should be deploying that today. This is like the large nuclear plants like in Georgia. But then, we should be investing and demonstrating the small modular reactors. And, people are investing in the fusion, and that's great. Like, why should we? I don't know. I can't foresee the future, and if I'm not making the investment decisions in each of these various technology choices, me as an advocate and as a climate concerned citizen, I don't care how it happens. I just want the fossil fuel services to be displaced by non-fossil sources of energy.
My take on fusion is that I'd like to see a proof of principle at least first before people start talking about it big time. And all excuse.
Jim, you're cutting out there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that a lot of attention for fusion is inappropriate if we don't even have proof of principle yet. And I'm just expressing a hope that it doesn't become a distraction for fission. Like, oh, we don't need fission, because we're going to have fusion. So that's kind of I'm worried about that a little bit. Not too worried though. So
I have to second that. My friend that I just visited recently worked on fusion for his whole career. And about every 15 years, I'd ask him, do you think it's getting close to commercializing? And he would say, well, maybe another 15 years. And that's been going on. I'm 84. He's my same age. And I think it's something for the future, and it's exciting. And I agree with the comments. We ought to try everything we can, keep learning what we can. But we have an urgency here to do something as quickly as we can. And so fission seems like it's an obvious way to go.
Well, I mean, Nucor's investment in Helion is a massive step. So Nucor is the cleanest steel manufacturer maybe in the world, and so they are serious, and they are investing in fusion as well as fission. It's not I definitely agree with many of the people who have said that we should definitely not wait for fusion. We should be deploying solar, wind, fission today, and if fusion is ready in 10 years time, great. Maybe we should deploy that too.
we'll see.
Well, awesome. This has been a really engaging conversation. Thanks everybody for joining, and do recommend you joining the Nuclear Energy Action Team. Yeah, if you want to tune in, I'm making a presentation on industrial heat this Saturday with the Texas Climate Solution Symposium. And I think we'll call it a day otherwise.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was really great.
Very good.
Everyone. Have a good night. Thank you, Brian. That was great. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity.